Jeff, you're with us?
Always with you.
Okay, so kindly assume your Talmudic position. We had discussed two additional Mishnahs yesterday. One was a person who was on the back of an animal and saw an object on the ground.
The Rolex.
What?
The
Rolex watch. And he asked the fellow on the ground to pick it up for him. The fellow, when he picked it up, gave it to the fellow on the back of the animal and told him, oh, by the way, when I picked it up for myself, and you can eat your heart out. This is what it looks like. The ruling over there was that the fellow that was on the ground gets 0. His argument is not accepted because since he picked it up and gave it to the fellow on the back of the animal, then we assume that he had completed the task that he was assigned. He was a shaliach, an agent of the person on the back of the animal, and an extension of hand of the person on the back of the animal. And therefore, the fellow on the back of the animal not only had intention to acquire it, but also made a physical kinyan, a symbolic act in order to acquire it. And so therefore he is the one. We saw also in that case that seeing something is not sufficient in order to acquire something. So the fact that he saw the watch on the ground, had he not gotten somebody to pick it up for him, it would not be his. We also saw, in addition, in that case, that the fellow on the ground, had he not given it to the fellow on the back of the animal, would not have had to have accepted the agency that he was given. You don't have to be somebody's shliach against your will. But since he handed it to the fellow on the back of the animal, we see that he was the shliach. Had he rejected that, picked it up for himself, he would have been the lucky party.
So,
Mr. Elliott.
yes. So just to confirm, the moment that the guy on the animal requests it, no matter what happens in between, the moment it's in his hand, it's his, correct? So say he says...
When he gets it from the other fellow.
Yeah, so even if the other fellow says, this is now mine. Oh no, I killed a caterpillar. Sorry, I just killed an animal by accident. Anyways, so if he says, the guy that picks up, this is mine now, do you want to hold it for me? And the guy says yes, who owns it at that point?
Before he put it into his hand?
Before he put it in his hand, can you hold this for me?
Yes.
He just shliach the shliach.
Yeah, what's happening there?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. If he indicated that he was not, but before he put it into the hand of the fellow in the back of the animal, he indicated that he was not going to be the shliach, meaning he somehow signaled us that he picked it up for himself. It is his. The fact that it ultimately ended up in the hand of the fellow on the back of the animal, that does not make
but
a
isn't that
difference.
the exact same as saying, by the way, I picked this up for me, not for you, and gives it to him? Is that the same thing?
Okay, no. So if he said that,
That's what you said before.
Well, no. He put it into the hand of the person on the back of the animal, and then told him.
Okay, I mixed it up. Okay.
Then we had a second case. We had two people who saw the Rolex watch on the ground. One person, Ruvain, very eager, pounced on it. Shimon came by, wrestled it out from under the gut of Ruvain, picked it up 3 handbreadths from the ground. Who is the one that gets the watch? Shimon. Shimon gets the watch, the reason being?
She picked it up 3 handbreadths, and that's the appropriate action.
The appropriate act.
No longer the
and
ground
pouncing
It's not an appropriate
is
act.
not an appropriate act. It will not get you any place in life. Okay. So, we did not see it in the words of the Talmud. The Gemara then told us that in order to avoid close situations where people might start physically vying for the same object, and it could lead to some type of discord and fracas. So they made a new kinyan. They made a new method of acquisition. Anybody recall the new method of acquisition?
7-foot rule.
The 7-foot rule. Excellent. Daled Amos. And let me ask you, Jeff, where do we get the number 4 from? Where's it?
As each letter represents a number. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, etc.
Okay, so we know that Daled means 4, but why is not 5 or why not 3?
I don't think we actually discussed that part yet.
European.
Because of the
European. Oh, it was in the custom.
personal space.
Personal space issue, right? Maybe I have to get into your face a little bit, Jeff, so you can appreciate that.
I'll be fine. Don't worry.
Okay.
I can handle.
So-
I usually violate personal space. It's hard to violate mine.
All right. So we assign everybody personal space, and not only in this area in Jewish law, but in many areas in Jewish law, it is Daled Amos, about 7 feet. Good. Then we said that this 7-foot rule seems to fly in the face of our Mishnah. Because let's go back to the case. The two fellows saw the Rolex watch on the ground. Ruvain pounced on it, and Shimon wrestled it out from under him. We gave it to Shimon. The question is, how come Ruvain does not get it? I agree with you that the pouncing is not an appropriate act by which one can acquire something. There is no such kinyan called pouncing. But if you pounce on something, haven't you arrived within its 7 feet before you pounced? And if you have, so then how come Ruvain doesn't get it by virtue of the 7-foot rule? Why does he lose it to Shimon?
Public versus private.
So we had 2 ways to answer that. What's public versus private? What does that mean?
This kinyan only applies in a public space.
In a public space. But in a private area, it doesn't apply. So our Mishnah must be speaking in what case? A private area. Now that's why Ruvain doesn't get it, and that's why it can be successfully wrenched out from under him. Good. There was a second school of thought, that the distinction wasn't public versus private, but rather intent. And tell me more about intent.
Well, just falling on something doesn't mean you intend to take it. Actually picking it up, because it has to be this distance off the ground, so it's no longer the possession of the ground.
But before...
You need intent, you need action. It's not, the action isn't followed.
Okay, but here, he certainly came within 7 feet of it by virtue, but because he pounced on it. He can't pounce on something without being within 7 feet of it. So how come we didn't get it just on that basis alone?
Because we don't know he intended to take it, because he just laid
Why
on it.
why don't we know that he intended to take it?
Because he didn't lift it off the ground. He just
But
laid on it.
you're right, he didn't lift it off the ground, but the 7-foot rule says you don't even have to touch it.
Correct, but you need to show intent that you wanted it.
But why is he showing any less intent than the person who just happens to walk by it and automatically gets it without doing anything else other than just walking by it?
Because there's a difference between laying on something and actually taking it.
That's what I want to know. What's the difference? That's what I want to know.
The difference is...
The difference
you
is...
leave it on the ground, therefore it's the ground's property. You need the 3-foot thing, so now it's your property. If you're laying on it, you're not actually lifting the object from the ground, so it's still the ground's
When I
property.
walk by it and now it's within my 7 feet, I'm not lifting anything either.
Right.
Because
and it's
you're
mine.
not going for it. If you're not even touching it, if I don't know, say there's 20 pounds of gold right there, and I walk right past it, and the person behind me picks it up, they had the intent because I didn't even notice it. So I had no intent to take it.
So you're telling me that the 7-foot rule doesn't work?
It works if you intend to take it first.
But so how do you know when the person intends or doesn't intend?
Intent.
You have to pick it up. But now that you're picking it up, That's not the 7-foot rule anymore. That's a new rule. That's called picking it up. That's a different method.
No. The Talmud's very complicated. It's not just one ruling.
I agree. It's very
common.
complicated. Okay, we need further clarification over here. Michael?
The understanding was that if you don't invoke the 7-foot rule, which would be demonstrated by taking a different action, then you kind of forego your 7-foot rule privileges
Okay, and how do you forego those privileges?
by doing something different or by taking an action other than.
By demonstrating contrary intent, right? If you demonstrate to us that you do not intend to invoke the 7-foot rule, and how can you indicate that to us that you don't intend to invoke the 7-foot rule?
By breaking the 7-foot rule. And
By breaking it? How do you break a
If
7-foot
the
rule?
court says, "Do you want to use this?" And they
Mike,
say
how do you
no.
show that you don't want to use the 7-foot rule?
Not sure. Pick it up? I don't know.
Okay, if you went to pick it up, then you're showing us that you didn't really intend to use the 7-foot rule. But in our case, it's even more obvious, and that is that
If you pounce
you
on
pounce on it.
Yeah.
Pouncing on it shows us that you demonstrated contrary intent. I'm showing you that I don't want to use the 7-foot rule. If I wanted to use the 7-foot rule, why would I get grass stains on my knees?
If you're pouncing on something, you're not necessarily taking it. You're blocking the other person from picking it up.
That's true. But so why did I have to even bother doing that if I'm a true believer in the 7-foot rule? I'll just run there quicker. So if I get within the 7 feet of the Rolex watch, it's automatically mine because of the 7-foot rule. This interloper comes and he wants to take it afterwards, so I got there first. He says, "No, I got there first." Oh, now we have a problem. Now we have to, and we have 2 claims. We're going to have to, work this one out in Besdin. But in the event that they both agree that Reuven got there first, then it's going to be his. Okay, so the 2 views are, number one, the difference between public and private, and in our Mishnah, the reason why the second fellow gets it is because it must be speaking that the pouncing took place on private property. Now, according to the other view, the reason why the second person gets it is because does it have anything to do with public versus private property?
No.
Nothing. So what does it have to do with? The fact that the first person showed us that he does not want to use the 7-foot rule by virtue of the fact that he pounced.
Why is it private property in the first one and not public? Wouldn't it be if it was on private property, neither of them have the claim because it would be for the property owner?
Right. If it was on private property, then neither of them, then the 7-foot rule doesn't work.
Okay.
But the
you could pounce on something or pick something
you
up
could
on
pick
private property.
something up on private property.
I see.
Good point. We'll have to find out more about that. But you're absolutely clear. That's absolutely true. Now, what I want to do is I want to start going into a new field of Talmudic thought that you probably have never done in any type of secular analog. Okay? And it's going to be a little bit difficult. But you guys can do it.
It's quite the intro. Now I'm excited.
You guys can do it. Okay? You're going to be stretching your brain in a way that it's never been stretched before. Here we go. The topic is called nafka mina. These are Aramaic words. The word nafka means what goes out, mina from it. What goes out from it. And in order to illustrate this, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take something which we have not yet studied, go to this new area, use it as a paradigm, get really familiar with it, and then import the process into what we're doing. Okay, you ready? So now we're going to embark on the new issue, which is going to be our paradigm. Now, the case is not a case that you're unfamiliar with, so that's going to make it a little bit friendlier. Here we go. You may have noticed that on Shabbos, after Kiddush, people go to the sink and they wash their hands. They say a blessing al netilas yadayim. They come back to the table. Shh, no one's saying anything. They line up around the table, wait for somebody to make hamotzi. They say amen, and they don't talk until they get some bread in their mouth, and then afterwards the meal starts. Okay, that's the process. You probably saw that already. Now, we're going to go into that process a little bit. You may have noticed also that at the time when hamotzi was being made, that there was salt on the table. And the person had taken some of the salt and put it on the board, and before giving you your piece, your first piece from the cut, dipped it into the salt and gave it to you to eat. Did anybody notice that?
Yeah.
Jeff, you notice that? Salt? Okay, good. We're going to be talking about now why it is that there's salt. What's that all about? You may have heard an explanation, and the explanation that you heard we will not be discussing, because the explanations I'm going to give you are absolutely different from what you heard. Not to say that what you heard is not correct. What you may have heard was that the table of a Jew is considered like a holy altar. And the holy altar in the temple always had salt on it because all the sacrificial parts that were put on the altar were salted. And now we're symbolically saying that our eating from this table is considered sanctified, like an altar is sanctified, and it's not just an animalistic activity. You know that there are some people in this world who live to eat. And there are other people in this world who eat to live. The difference between the two groups of people is that one group of people has something to live for, and the other group of people don't have much to live for. So the ones that don't have much to live for, they live to eat. Because now eating is their goal, meaning pleasure in their life is what their whole life is about. For a Jew, we certainly can get enjoyment and benefit from the food that we eat, but our eating is for a higher purpose. We eat to live because we have a Torah to keep, and we have to keep ourselves well-oiled and in good health in order to be able to accomplish that. Okay, so that's probably something close to what you may have heard in the past. We're going to go into an entirely different realm of explanation. This happens to be a different passage in the Talmud. It's in the tractate called Brachos, blessings, and over there we have a difference of opinion between Rashi and Tosafos as to why we have salt at the time of Hamotzi. Ready? According to Rashi, the reason why we use salt is so that the bread tastes better. Did you ever have food and you say somebody must have left out the salt?
Yep.
It's bland. It just has no, what we say in Yiddish, tam. It doesn't have any kind of taste.
Yeah.
You had it. So, in order for the bread to taste the best, we put salt on it. Why? Because since the person is making the blessing of Hamotzi Lechem min haaretz, he's thanking God for giving him the bread. Your level of gratitude is certainly going to be enhanced and greater if the bread tastes good as opposed to whether or not the bread tastes bland. And so in order for a person to be able to have a stronger sense of gratitude, we want to make sure that the bread is well salted so that it tastes good. That is Rashi's explanation. Any questions so far?
Solid
Make
answer.
sense? What?
Solid answer.
Okay, solid answer. Now we're going to go to Tosaf's answer. Tosaf's explanation. Tosaf's explanation comes from the Kabbalistic literature. Are you familiar with the Kabbalah? Ever hear about the Kabbalah?
Yeah.
The Kabbalistic literature? What do you know about it?
It's the mystical part.
Mystical, it's spooky. Yeah.
It's every story is actually, well, it's
Spooky.
introducing this element and that element versus just a story.
It's a little spooky. Well, so if we had to explain the Kabbalistic literature in a nutshell, we would say the following. Physics is the study of natural law that exists in the world that we inhabit. Gravity, speed of light, speed of sound, and physics investigates these natural laws. There's a spiritual world within which we live, and the spiritual physics is in the Kabbalistic literature. All the laws that underpin and undergird the spiritual principles in the universe are discussed in the Kabbalistic literature. That's why it's so spooky. Right. So Tosfos actually cites the Kabbalistic literature to explain why it is that we have salt at the table. And this is something a bit far from our experience, but I'm going to try to make it as understandable as I can. And that is that there's what's called a satanic indictment. Did you ever hear about a satanic indictment? There's a spiritual force called the Satan. In English, his name goes as Satan. Who is Satan? Satan is the devil.
Angel.
He's the devil, right? And we do believe that there is a devilish kind of guy, and his name is Satan. What does Satan do for a living? What he does is that he complains. And he gets, and it's a great job if you can get it,
Every Jew's applying for it right now.
you don't have to do anything positive. All you have to do is just complain, and they pay you. So what he does is that he has God's ear, and he complains to God about different things in order to rile God, so to speak, for him to act in a negative fashion. So what happens is that a Jew dutifully goes over to the washing sink to wash his hands for hamotzi, and on his way over and at the sink, he could be speaking to other people, he could be studying words of Torah, he's got a lot of things he could be doing. He could be praying. But on the way back, he can't say a thing. So on the way back from the washing sink until he gets to the table, Satan says to God, "You see that Jew down there? You see, you call him a good Jew? Did you see him even mouth one word of Torah on his way back to the table? Did he offer even one fraction of a prayer? And you call him a good Jew?" Now, when Satan riles God, so what happens is we are taught that there is a ledger book on everybody. Everything is very carefully written down. Time, date, what you did, your name, last four of your social security. We don't want to do more than that because of different cyber crimes. So everything's written down in the ledger, and then whenever there's a satanic indictment, so then they start going through the ledger to pick off things which would even add oil to the flame over here. Oh, is it not only that, but did you see what he did yesterday? Like, I can't believe it. Right. So they go through the ledger, and then this person could be toast after a while. So, in order to protect this Jew who's going back to the table and waiting for the hamotzi to be said, and he is not uttering a word, we have salt on the table to remind God of the covenant of salt. What is this covenant of salt? A covenant is an agreement, and if it's an agreement that's made out of salt, salt is one of the few things in this world that can't decay. It doesn't rust. You can't get rid of it. Salt always is.
I don't think salt can transfer germs either.
You can what?
I don't think salt can transfer germs.
Transfer germs. I guess if it's not contaminated. So it's something which is everlasting. So when you're talking about a covenant of salt, you're talking about a covenant that is an everlasting covenant, an abiding agreement between God and the Jewish people, that we are his people and he's always going to protect us. So we always put that little flag out just to, at the table, make sure that this satanic indictment is never going to get off the ground. Now, if this is not convoluted, involuted, and spiritually interesting, I don't know what is. But according to Tosfos, this is the reason why there's salt. Has anybody ever heard this reason before? I thought we'd catch on that. My brother heard it. Now, so there are two different reasons as to why we have salt at the table. According to Rashi, why we have salt?
Delicious.
Makes it taste better. According to Tosfos,
Everlasting commitment.
to ward off the satanic indictment. Everybody got it? Okay, good. Now, here we're going to employ nafkamina.
My safta used to put salt in my pockets before going to my bar mitzvah.
Before going to your bar mitzvah. In his pocket or your pocket?
In my pockets.
In your pocket. Okay. We could talk about that, but he had some type of connection to the Kabbalistic literature. Anyway, now we're going to talk about nafkamina. What is the nafkamina between Rashi and Tosfos' explanation? So I'm going to give you an example of a nafkamina, so you get to see one for yourself. A nafkamina is going to be a concrete case. So number one, it's a concrete case. It's not what if, it's not what would be, it's not a question, it's a concrete case. Okay? And number two, it's a concrete case that's going to create a bifurcation. Is anybody familiar with a bifurcation?
Split something into.
That's right. When some of the things bifurcate, they go off into two different directions. You know what Yogi Berra used to say? If you see a fork in the road, take it. That's what he used to say. Yogi was brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. So now a fork in the road is a bifurcation. If we were to follow Rashi's logic, it would take us this way. Tosfos' logic would take us that way. So I'm going to give you a nafkamina, which is a concrete case, which highlights the bifurcation between the two opinions. Ready? Would you need salt at the time of making hamotzi if the bread recipe required salt in the recipe? It was pre-salted bread. Would you require salt?
I say, would you require additional salt? Is what you're saying?
Would you? Right? You have to have the salt on the table. Would you have to have salt on the table if you were going to be eating pre-salted bread?
based on one school, yes, and based on the other, no.
So let's hear it. Which,
Oh.
according to Rashi,
No,
why not?
because it wouldn't make it taste better.
Wouldn't make it taste better, and he would be able to make his blessing with the right gusto that he was supposed to.
Right.
And according to Tosas,
Yes, because you would want to ward off the satanic indictment.
you want to ward off that satanic indictment because you need to have a salt cellar there. You know what a salt cellar is? SCELLAR, a cellar. Right?
Storage place?
Salt cellar is a little. You know, on Shabbos they had clear plastic parallelograms or something that that held the salt. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, so those are salt cellars. So according to Tosfos, you need a salt cellar. So here, this is a practical case where the two reasons separate. Okay, you got that? Does everybody understand how a nafka works? Great. And now I'm going to ask you for a nafka in the very same case. A different nafka.
In which case?
In the case with the bread. Give me another nafka. And I'm going to give you time to think about it. Bum 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 bum. Time's up. What?
What was the question?
The question is, you're looking for another nafkamina. I gave you a nafkamina in this case with the bread.
Okay.
Okay, I gave you a concrete case where the two paths would separate. I'm asking you for another case that you're going to manufacture that's going to show how the two separate.
Now, if you have a family of people who hate the taste of salt, for example, I don't know.
Do you want us to use a completely different example, just anything? Religious or not religious?
In this context, when would you need salt or not need salt? Okay, so Michael's suggesting what would be well, maybe just to modify your case.
Right.
What would be if an individual was on a low sodium diet?
Right.
On a low sodium diet, would you need to have salt at the table for the hamotzi?
I would say
At the table or to use the salt that's at the table?
Would you need it?
So you're saying, would you need salt to
According
use?
to Rashi,
No,
why not?
because it wouldn't make it taste better,
I mean, although
or it wouldn't make the person more
it
grateful.
wouldn't be grateful. It might make it taste better,
Right.
but it could kill him also,
Right.
right? So we're not going to ask him to get killed for this, right? But according to Tosas, would you need the salt cellar on the table to ward off the satanic indictment?
Yeah.
But you're on a low sodium diet.
you can have it on the table, but not necessarily eat it.
Yeah, you're not going to eat it. Good. Okay, so that's another nafkamina. Now I'm going to ask you for a reverse nafkamina, because right now we've been talking about cases where, according to Rashi, you wouldn't eat it, and according to Tosas, you would need it. I'm going to ask you for a reverso. Are you familiar with a reverso pasado? Anybody fence?
Or so percent. Yeah.
Let's say reverse position.
You do fence?
No.
A reverso pasado is terrific. You ever see anybody in a fencing match where they lunge at the other person with their sword? So if you know how to do a reverso pasado, what you do is you take all of his energy in his lunge and you turn it around so that his sword is not going to go into his chest.
I can teach some of those self-defenses too. If you
Okay,
guys wanna learn.
that is like one of the most effective moves, because you're using his energy against himself. Anyway, what we're going to do is a reversal. We want, according to Tosas, where you wouldn't need the salt, and according to Rashi, you would. So I'm going to give you a little chance to think about the nafkamina over there. By the way, do you hear the difficulty we're dealing with over here? You ever thought this way before? Generally, you don't think this way. Here we go. Reverse nafkamina.
is if you're inside like the Holy Temple, for example, that's the holiest place on the planet. So like,
You're not going to
Satan
be.
can't do anything about that.
Well,
No voice of reason's gonna convince God anything otherwise.
I don't know. I'm not sure. There are plenty of people that died in the Holy Temple.
Yeah. But do you think Satan was like, ha, they died?
300,
Yeah.
300 Kohen Gadols, 300 individuals who were the head of all the priests, died on Yom Kippur.
Passover, matzah.
Passover matzah. Let's hear.
There is no bread. There's matzah.
Well, so the matzah is the bread. Okay.
Right. And then what are the implications of adding salt to that?
What's the situation where you wouldn't need to ward off the...
That's what you're asking me. I'm asking you. I'm asking you.
Just to confirm, we're looking for a situation where we put something on our food to make it taste better, irregardless of Satan.
Right.
And Satan only says something when it involves like between prayers, is what you were saying, or
The Jew is silent. He's not even saying any words of Torah. He's not praying.
The Jew is silent.
When you're silent?
Oh. Gluten-free.
Gluten-free.
No, we still make him blessing over the bread. Think of a situation where we can talk. We
Right.
can say prayers and say hamotzi.
I don't know.
Alright, don't give us answers. Let's think about this.
Good. I'm glad you appreciate the challenge, because you really have to become very facile with daf kaminas. We're going to be training your mind to be looking for them. This is how a Talmudist looks at the world, through the lens of nafkamina.
So basically, Satan only says something if a Jew is silent, right?
Not necessarily.
Well, he may have other reasons to do that, but he certainly does, have a lot to indict about.
Okay,
Oh.
here's one.
Yeah.
What if the Jew has already made the satanic, indictment, or has been indicted somehow?
He's already serving on a prior indictment.
Right. So he doesn't need to worry.
Oh, you know what? Satan will get him a second time, and there won't be concurrent sentences either.
Okay, well, what if it's not over bread?
Well, we
You
only
can do
we
a
only need
prayer.
we only need salt for bread.
Well, you said salt was for flavor, so you can put salt on other things besides bread, right?
Correct.
So let's see. What if a guy likes salt on his apples? I don't know. You can do a prayer. You don't have to wash your hands and everything. You do a prayer over the food you're about to eat. Salt it, make it taste better, then eat it.
It's true, but there's no requirement to salt your apple.
So you're looking for a
Do you know
requirement where you have to salt.
Right. Did you know the people that salt their watermelon? You ever meet them?
Uh-huh.
There are people that do that. It makes it much sweeter.
Okay, so we're looking for something where you halachically have to salt something and you're doing it for taste, and there's no consequences.
We're looking for somewhere where there's no need to prevent the satanic indictment.
And that indictment happens when he sees you wasting time. Is that essentially it? When you could be doing something like praying or do something like studying, you're wasting time.
He sees that you're not really sincere and putting in your all, because you're a bump on the log. The 5 minutes about walking back from the sink and sitting at the table, you look like a bump on the log.
Would it make any difference if two people are making hamotzi?
So thoughts don't matter then?
What if you're speaking?
Well, you can't speak between prayers.
Right, but what if you are?
All right, so but then you violate. Then he's going to really get you,
What
because
if
he's going
you-
to say, "Oh,
Yeah.
You know,
What if
see,
you're
see,
thinking?
he's speaking between
But thinking about
between
studying, I think you're
his
not
pr-
prayer.
his Alatilas Yadayim and his Hamotzi. He's speaking. Let's nab him on that.
What if he's drawing out the washing hands prayer until he gets to the bread? So there's nothing. Because then you have kavana. You don't know.
Oh, okay. So he's saying a very slow prayer on washing his hands. That could be. That would
Or
definitely
bring
be.
the bread right next to the washing station. So
Just quickly, okay,
Okay.
but also, do thoughts matter or thoughts do not matter?
Well,
Because if you're thinking about your studies earlier the day,
that's a good point. Well, see, he's reviewing them in his mind, but Sutton is looking at his lips.
lips don't matter. The soul's in the mind.
singing,
I hear it.
whistling.
I hear it. How about the following? Let's say that he has earbuds and he's listening to this shear that's going on right now as
What does
he's
shir mean?
shear is a class, a Torah class. He's listening to this Torah class and reviewing it as he's walking from the washing station, sitting at the table, and waiting for Hamotzi.
Mm-hmm.
So what's Sutton going to say? Look at that Jew. He's not even studying your Torah now.
But he is.
But and God is going to say, "What are you talking about? What do you think those earbuds in his ears are all about?" He's reviewing exactly this whole case.
He's got it.
So there, according to Tosas, you don't need salt on the table because there can't be a satanic indictment. He is studying Torah. But according to Rashi,
You need the salt.
you still need to make the bread taste better.
According to Rashi, you can use the salt to make it taste better, right? Or you have to.
You have to. Now you might. So I see where you're going, Jeff. What about honey? Would this be an afkamina between Rashi and Tosas that you put honey on the table as opposed to salt?
That's what I was thinking.
Oh, it's still making it taste better. Doesn't matter if it's
But
salted.
does honey ward off the satanic indictment?
No.
Two
So
separate arguments.
right. So that wouldn't that bifurcate?
But can honey go bad?
No, it can't.
Actually, it doesn't.
It can't either.
No, you can. They actually taste
They-
the honey from Egyptian pyramids, like 4,000-year-old honey.
They
Rosh
use
Hashanah.
they use honey as a preservative. In fact, there's a passage in the Talmud where there was this very perverse man who wanted to marry a young girl who repelled his advances, and in order to make sure that she would not fall into his clutches, she jumped off the roof and committed suicide. But he had such a strong affection for her that he preserved her in honey for 7 years and had relations with her for those 7 years. You know what he called her?
Honey.
Honey. That's right. No, but there's such a passage in the Talmud. So honey obviously is a good preservative. So what would be if you put honey on the table? Would that be an afkamina between Rashi and Tosas?
Probably not.
Why not? According to Rashi, you dip your bread in your honey,
Because honey's sticky.
Tastes better.
No,
You're more grateful.
the issue
and according
is,
to Tosas,
There's no salt to ward off.
honey doesn't ward off the satanic indictment because only there's a covenant of salt. There is no covenant of honey.
Okay, both.
But the answer is that will not be an afkamina.
Right.
Why not?
Can you say it in English that because there will not be
A practical difference between the two.
so the real issue
You
is
know, why not? Why would honey not be a practical difference between the two?
because you're still not doing prayers or doing anything in the meantime. So therefore, Satan can be like, see, do nothing.
So that's why you're subject to the satanic indictment. The question is, but according to Rashi, how come there's a difference between salt and honey?
So there's a covenant of salt?
That's according to Tosfos. We have to worry with the covenant. According to Rashi, Rashi never brought in the whole concept of covenant. I would like to suggest the following. You ready? There's a big difference between salt and honey.
Taste-wise?
That's right. Salt brings out the taste that's inherent in the food. Honey superimposes a new taste on the food. When you're making a hamotzi on the bread, the blessing is about the bread, not about the chocolate coating that you put on top of it. When you're a synagogue rabbi, people call you all the time. But how would they know that I'm in the middle of a class? So I can just send them a text that says, I'm sorry, I can't handle it right now. Please call me back later.
Technology.
Isn't that great? So anyway,
So let's
so do you hear the difference between salt and honey?
Yeah.
Okay, so
And that's also a difference in terms of what Torah is supposed to do to your personality. Torah is salt. Torah is not honey. Torah is supposed to bring out your full flavor, not superimpose upon you something artificial which is not inherent about you.
Lipstick.
Lipstick.
what if you're not planning to eat the bread at all? You can still put it on for flavor, but not have any of the bread. You don't have to do the prayer at all then.
Well, you wouldn't be washing.
You don't
If you wouldn't be
you have
washing
to
at
wash
the sink.
before you eat food anyways.
Not the alatilas yadayim washing. You know, and even if you do wash for health reasons, you're not quiet. You're allowed to talk on your way back. It's only because you made alatilas yadayim that you're not allowed to talk until the hamotzi. Got it? Okay.
Don't tell us the answer yet.
Okay. So this is another nafkamina. The reverse nafkamina would be the earbuds case. Okay, can we have another nafkamina between Rashi and Tosfos? This nafkamina was already hinted at before, but it's the most basic nafkamina between the two, practical difference between the two, right? So it's like the most obvious practical difference between the two. And I'm going to leave that for you to tell me. It's staring you in the face.
You're asking us what's the most practical difference between
Rashi and Tosfos' view about salting the bread, about salt.
The intent. The intent's the biggest difference.
But again, a nafkamina is a practical case, and the word intent is not a case. Notice that all the situations we've been speaking about are cases. Earbuds, that's a case. Pre-salted bread, that's a case. Intent is not a case. Intent is a description. But a nafkamina has to be a concrete case.
You're asking us the concrete case between
Rashi and
salt for bread,
Tosfos,
salt for-
so Rashi and Tosfos, the most obvious distinction between the two.
meaning
It's like staring you in the face.
one uses senses, one doesn't?
But that's not
one's
a...
a physical, one's a spiritual.
Okay, but again, the word nafkamina means a concrete case. You're giving me a description, and up until now, I've been giving you concrete cases. Pre-salted bread, earbuds in the ear, low sodium diet. Right? These are concrete cases.
You said multiple motis.
What if, similar to the earbud case, what if someone is praying or saying words of Torah who's not currently at that table silently doing the blessing? So, for example, if, there's someone's at a dinner and they're doing the blessing, or they're silent as someone else is doing the blessing while they're listening to someone give a shiur.
So instead of earbuds, he's actually overhearing somebody else give a shiur.
Right.
Okay. All right, so that's earbuds on earbuds, but okay, but It's in the same vein.
Yeah.
That's also true.
I don't
But
know.
this is the most
More
obvious.
obvious.
This is the most obvious difference between the two. Salt at the table. Does the salt have to go into your mouth?
No.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Does the salt have
Flavor
to?
it does.
According to Rashi,
It has to go in your mouth.
it has to go into your mouth. You're going to be ingesting salt. According to Tosfos, there's no ingestion of salt.
Okay.
That's going to be the most obvious difference between the two.
Yeah.
Do you have to have salt or not have salt? Salt at the table, for sure you have to, we're talking about. But whether or not it's going to go into your mouth, only according to Rashi does it go into your mouth. According to Tosfos, it never goes into your mouth.
Right.
That's what I said. I said physical versus spiritual. The physical
Well,
one is the taste.
okay,
Spiritual
well, it's
is
still physical,
part of
right?
the tradition.
Okay, if that's what you said, then I'm going to give you the points.
But what's your so what? So that's a difference.
So is that's an nafkamina?
That'll be an nafkamina.
Okay.
Nafkamina will be, do you end up ingesting salt? According to Rashi, you have to end up ingesting salt.
Right.
According to Tosfos, there's no ingestion of salt. As long as the salt's on the table, that reminds God of the covenant of salt, and whether you use it, you don't use it. Now today, what did you, on Shabbos, when they cut up the challah, did they dip it in the salt?
Yeah.
They did. According to whose view?
Both.
Only according to Rashi. Right? The salt was on the table.
Right.
Okay? So we took care of Tosfos' issue.
Yeah.
But in order to accommodate Rashi's view, they took the bread and dipped it in the salt.
So both.
So we did both. It was not an nafkamina. We did both. Right? We wanted to. An nafkamina would be one would be say yes and one would say no. Here we want to fulfill both of their views. So therefore we dipped it into the salt.
But the dipping is to satisfy Rashi.
Only Rashi's view, because according to Tosfos, there's no need at all to dip it into the salt.
It just has to be
All
present.
you have to do is have salt cellar on the table, because that just wards off all those things that you need warding off of.
Well, what am I supposed to take out of this?
What are you supposed to take out of this?
He's like, what?
Okay.
That's so funny.
Okay. We're using this as a paradigm to come up with a new technique called finding a nafkamina.
Difference.
To show to show me to think in concrete cases where the two views are going to bifurcate.
Like a decision tree, exactly what you were doing with your hands.
According to this, you would have to. According to this, you wouldn't have to. In this particular case, this shows with clarity where one view would require and one view would not require. Okay, but you need to learn how to search for that. Was it difficult? You didn't come. No one came up with them like 1, 2, 3, because you have to think about it where this one's going to, this one's not going to, and what would be the circumstances. You have to come up with a case. And so we need to develop those muscles because you haven't used those muscles yet. Now that we've started developing those muscles, we're going to import that technique into what we've been studying about the Rolex watch.
Okay. I'll wait.
Mike really wants that Rolex watch. I could.
Me too.
Okay. See, maybe he'll be the lucky guy. We don't know. Okay, so tomorrow, God willing, we will import what we've learned today into our study tomorrow.
It's like using Photoshop and then bringing it back into Premiere to finish editing.
Okay. Maybe that's what it's like.